Oh heavens! Since you saw fit to create Zhou Yu, why create Zhou Lang? Tragic, humiliated sigh of the Grand Viceroy is a deeply memorable scene. When Zhou Yu screams this phrase at the sky, utterly broken, and literally infuriated to death by the brilliant stratagems of his rival Zhou Lang, did you not feel a pang of frustration and profound injustice on his behalf? In the collective childhood memories of countless individuals shaped by popular media, Zhou Yu is almost eternally cast as a narrow-minded, pathologically jealous antagonist. Is portrayed as the quintessential, eternal runner-up, a man whose sole purpose was to be intellectually crushed by Zhou Lang. Whenever Zhou Lang enters the stage, his script seems completely predetermined. He is destined to be ruthlessly outsmarted, easily provoked into blind rages, and ultimately driven to a blood-coughing, pathetic demise. However, the truth is far more astonishing. Luo Guanzhong's literary masterpiece has successfully deceived us. For centuries, the historical Zhou Yu was absolutely not angered to death by Zhou Lang. Furthermore, his sheer brilliance, strategic vision, and boundless magnanimity were just extraordinary. Even amidst the dazzling constellation of heroes during the late Han Dynasty and the Three Kingdoms period, he can only be described as perfect. If this epic saga were viewed through the lens of our modern web novel, the script handed to Zhou Yu would undoubtedly be the overpowered protagonist. He possessed an impeccable aristocratic lineage, breathtaking beauty and musical mastery, and he stands as the undisputed foundational architect of the great Eastern Wu Empire. Today, let us strip away the dense fog of fiction woven by this romance. Let us reach across the vast expanse of 1,800 years to meet the absolute peerless talent amidst the roaring flames of red cliffs, who laughed and chatted as his enemy's massive fleet was reduced to ashes. This is the true Zhou Gongjin. Understand Zhou Yu, one must first understand what it truly means to be born with absolutely every conceivable advantage. In the year 175 AD, Zhou Yu was born in Shu County, a region of the Lujiang Commandery located in modern-day Anhui Province. His family, the illustrious Zhou clan of Lujiang, was a top-tier aristocratic powerhouse. This was during the twilight years of the Eastern Han Dynasty. His great-uncle and uncle both ascended to the exalted rank of Taiwei. They were the supreme military commanders of the state. To put this in a modern perspective, Zhou Yu was a bona fide nobleman, stepping out of the absolute highest echelon of old money elite families. Yet, it was not merely his impeccable pedigree that set him apart. His personal attributes were so flawless, they bordered on the completely unfair. The official historical text evaluates his physical appearance using 4 incredibly weighty characters. These translate to tall, robust, and possessing striking, graceful looks. In plain terms, he possessed a towering physique paired with a handsome face. He was the universally acknowledged, idol-level superstar of his era. The common people of the Jiangdong region revered him so deeply, they refused to use his given name, instead affectionately calling him Zhou Lang, a term of endearment meaning the youthful Master Zhou. Adding to this immense physical charisma, or youthful, Master Zhou was a prodigy. He was a supreme musical genius, akin to a world-class maestro. The historical records have left us with an intensely romantic idiom: if there is a mistake in the tune, Zhou Lang will look your way. This phrase illustrates that, even when Zhou Yu was heavily intoxicated, if a musician playing nearby missed even the most minute, subtle note, his exquisitely trained ear would instantly detect the flaw, prompting him to turn and cast a glance at the performer. Close your eyes and envision this incredibly cinematic scene. Handsome, dashing young general, slightly flushed with wine, turning his gaze toward you because your fingers slipped, offering a knowing smile. It is no wonder the young women of Jiangdong were driven to distraction. Maidens would deliberately pluck the wrong strings on their instruments, just to earn a fleeting backward glance from Zhou Lang. Faced with such overwhelming charm, who could possibly resist? However, an elite background, a beautiful face, and musical genius, These are absolutely not the totality of Zhou Yu. If that were all he possessed, he would be a superficial celebrity. Just another pretty face. Of the three kingdoms, what truly immortalized his name and shook the foundations of history was the metaphorical sword he wielded to conquer Jiangdong, alongside the illustrious military merits he achieved in a blood-soaked world. At the tender age of 15, Zhou Yu encountered a monumental turning point. He met his ultimate confidant and soulmate, the little conqueror, Sun Si. Born in the exact same year and month, the two boys connected, feeling as though they had known each other for lifetimes. Zhou Yu's devotion was completely absolute. He vacated his family's massive, luxurious mansion for Sun Si's family. When Sun Si raised his army to pacify the Jiangdong region, Zhou Yu unhesitatingly brought his own troops, wealth, and provisions. He did all of this to join his brother's cause. Thrilled by this loyalty, Sun Si proudly announced to the world, with Gongjin's help, "My great cause is finally assured." This dynamic duo was deeply envied by later generations. They were dubbed the twin jewels of Jiangdong, fighting shoulder to shoulder, sweeping aggressively across the 6 commanderies of the southeast. Their legendary conquests even included the capture of Wan City, where they married the daughters of Lord Chao. The most beautiful women, Sun Si married the mature and gentle elder Chao, while Zhou Yu married the vibrant and stunning younger Chao. Brilliant heroes paired with peerless beauties, riding magnificent steeds in glorious attire. It was an era of breathtaking, triumphant youth. Tragically, fate proved fiercely jealous of such brilliance. In the year 200 AD, at the unbelievably young age of 26, the unstoppable Sun Si was suddenly assassinated. The crushing, monumental burden of ruling the vast Jiangdong territory suddenly plummeted onto the shoulders of his younger brother, Sun Quan, who was a mere 18 years old at the time. The state was thrust into unprecedented peril, facing complete disaster. Internally, the fiercely independent Shanyu tribes were constantly launching rebellions. Externally, heavily armed warlords glared at their borders with predatory hunger. The entire regime was battered by endless storms, teetering violently on the edge of total collapse. Zhou Yu, who was stationed away from the capital, guarding the frontiers, heard the devastating news of his brother's brutal murder. Without a moment's hesitation, he mobilized his troops. He marched day and night, racing back to mourn his friend. Upon his arrival, he executed a move of profound political genius. As the absolute, unquestioned leader of the military forces, he approached the terrified young Sun Quan and performed the highest, most solemn ceremonial bow of a subservient minister. The weight of that single bow was as heavy as Mount Tai. It instantly paralyzed and suppressed every arrogant, rebellious veteran general who harbored secret ambitions of usurping power during the transition. By bending his own knee, Zhou Yu single-handedly anchored the volatile empire. It is no exaggeration to state this simple fact. Without his deliberate act of public submission, the regime would have disintegrated. It would have turned to dust. The very year Sun Si died, the absolute zenith of Zhou Yu's brilliant life, his most glorious, blindingly radiant moment, undeniably occurred in 208 AD. Right beside the great rolling waters of the Yangtze River. In that fateful year, the formidable warlord Cao Cao unified the northern plains, riding a wave of terrifying momentum, harboring ambition like a ravenous tiger. Cao Cao led colossal armada to the banks of the Yangtze, a self-proclaimed force of 800,000 soldiers, intending to annihilate Eastern Wu in a single apocalyptic strike. Faced with a monstrous army that seemed large enough to blot out the sun, the Eastern Wu court was thrown into violent convulsions of terror. The civil administrators, led by Zhang Zhao, had their courage entirely shattered. Weeping and panicking, they desperately begged the young ruler to surrender the nation. In this suffocating, pitch-black hour of existential crisis, it was Zhou Yu who rushed back overnight from his naval base, striding into the deeply oppressive atmosphere of the military council. He decisively drew his sword from its scabbard, cutting through the cowardly rhetoric and forcefully advocating for war against all opposition. The events that followed have echoed through a millennium of history. However, in the unforgiving light of genuine historical truth, the Battle of Red Cliffs featured absolutely no magical altars. Zhuge Lang never summoned the eastern winds with cheap parlor tricks, nor were there any miraculous boats made of grass to borrow enemy arrows. The sole, undisputed protagonist of this legendary clash was Zhou Yu, collaborating closely with the veteran General Huang Gai, who engineered the brilliant, devastating masterstroke of a massive fire attack, harnessing the violent gusts of the southeastern wind. Dozens of warships, packed with highly combustible dry reeds and soaked in oil, were suddenly unleashed upon the helpless enemy. Like the very flames of hell, they plummeted toward Cao Cao's massive fleet, which the northern warlord had foolishly chained together to prevent seasickness. On that apocalyptic night, the churning waters of the Yangtze River were painted a horrifying vivid blood red by the towering inferno. Cao Cao's grand, invincible army of hundreds of thousands was utterly incinerated, turning to ash amidst the agonizing screams of the dying. And where was the 34-year-old Zhou Yu during this carnage? He stood majestically at the bow of his flagship, facing the roaring winds. He commanded the chaos with absolute, serene composure. Through this battle, the most famous textbook example in Chinese history, a smaller force destroying a massive army, Zhou Yu comprehensively solidified the grand geopolitical reality of the Three Kingdoms era. In this monumental conflict, Zhuge Lang was merely a diplomatic envoy, facilitating the alliance between the warlord Liu Bei and Sun Quan. Was Zhou Yu alone, the unparalleled god of war, who genuinely saved the entire southern half of the continent from northern conquest? Hearing this, one might naturally assume he was terrifyingly competent, a wildly successful, and extraordinarily young military dictator who must have been intensely arrogant, short-tempered, and unbearable. After all, could the romance of the Three Kingdoms depiction of him as a petty, jealous man be entirely without foundation? To answer this, we must completely discard the fictional novel and examine a meticulously recorded historical anecdote from the records of the Three Kingdoms, one that perfectly illuminates the boundless, oceanic vastness of Zhou Yu's character. Within the ranks of the Eastern Wu military, there was an entrenched veteran, a highly experienced general named Cheng Pu. Cheng Pu was no ordinary soldier. He was a founding father of the regime, a man who fought fiercely through rivers of blood alongside Sun Quan's late father, Sun Jian, carve out their original territory. Looking at Zhou Yu, who, in Cheng Pu's eyes, was merely a young boy, a smooth-faced pretty boy who had rocketed to the top position over the heads of his elders purely because he was friends with Sun Ce. The grizzled veteran felt nothing but utter disdain and blinding resentment whenever they held military councils or randomly crossed paths in the encampments. Cheng Pu leveraged his advanced age and supreme seniority, publicly and relentlessly mock the Grand Viceroy. He deliberately weaponized his disrespect, seizing every conceivable opportunity to humiliate Zhou Yu in front of all the troops. Consider this: if an ordinary person in a modern workplace faced such toxic insubordination, especially while holding absolute power over life and death, could they really endure such suffocating indignity? A lesser man would have immediately abused his authority to sabotage Cheng Pu, or stormed into the ruler Sun Quan's chambers to demand the old man's head. But how did the immensely powerful Zhou Gongjin actually react? He reacted with the silent, majestic grace of a mountain. Zhou Yu possessed an overarching visionary understanding of the geopolitical landscape, something that ordinary men could simply never fathom. He recognized that, with a massive enemy looming on the horizon, the civil and military leadership of Eastern Wu absolutely had to remain unified. To him, absorbing personal grievances and swallowing insults was utterly insignificant, especially when weighed against the survival and prosperity of the state. Over a long period of time, Zhou Yu's unwavering, radiant sincerity worked. It managed to melt even the coldest, hardest stone. General Cheng Pu slowly began to realize that Zhou Yu's military genius was superior. It was infinitely superior to his own. But the young man's astonishing capacity for forgiveness and his ocean-like tolerance made Cheng Pu feel profoundly ashamed of his own petty behavior. Eventually, the day arrived when the white-haired veteran Cheng Pu personally marched over to Zhou Yu's residence to offer a formal, incredibly humbling apology for his transgressions. The two men completely resolved their differences, forging an unbreakable bond. Reflecting on this transformation, Cheng Pu later uttered a profound quote that has been passed down through centuries of history. Associating with Zhou Gongjin is like drinking fine, mellow wine. You become intoxicated without even realizing it. Consider this deeply: a man who could inspire a stubborn, bitter, old rival to compare his friendship to the intoxicating warmth of the finest wine. A man who willingly endured relentless humiliation and repaid malice with virtue, purely for the greater good of his nation. How could such a profoundly noble figure possibly be the petty, conniving villain of the romance of the Three Kingdoms? A man supposedly driven to cough up blood over minor grievances. The true historical Zhou Yu was the absolute antithesis of narrow-mindedness. He possessed the grandest vision, the highest emotional intelligence, and was the most supreme gentleman of the entire Three Kingdoms era. After the city apocalyptic flames of red cliffs finally died down, Zhou Yu's piercing gaze did not remain narrowly fixated on the spoils of Jingzhou. Within his chest burned an ambition far fiercer and grander. Fan the fires he had unleashed on the river. He approached Sun Quan and laid out an absolutely staggering, monumental geopolitical blueprint, the grand strategy to divide the empire into two. His masterful design was to personally command his victorious armies on a relentless march westward to conquer the fertile basin of Sichuan, then known as Yizhou. From there, he planned to secure the highly strategic choke point of Hanzhong. Following this, he would forge a powerful military alliance with the fierce warlord Macao, who controlled the northwestern frontier of Xiliang. Through this dazzling combination of military conquests and diplomatic maneuvering, Yu aimed to completely unify the entire southern and western halves of China. With this massive, fortified domain, he would then face Cao Cao across the river, splitting the world evenly in half, before biding his time to launch a final, devastating northern expedition to entirely reunify the fractured empire under the Wu banner. This was a breathtakingly ambitious roadmap, arguably far more aggressive and tactically executable than Zhuge Liang's famous Longzhong plan. Upon hearing this sweeping vision, Sun Quan was electrified with excitement and instantly gave the plan his total, unequivocal authorization. Tragically, the heavens are unpredictable, and fate is often extraordinarily cruel. In the year 210 AD, just as Zhou Yu was fiercely drilling his troops, stockpiling provisions, and preparing his grand return to Jiangling to launch the invasion of the West, disaster suddenly struck. While passing through Baku, he was suddenly incapacitated by a severe illness. Shortly thereafter, the brightest, most dazzling star in the violent night sky of the Three Kingdoms violently fell. In that heartbreaking year, Zhou Gongjin was only 36 years old. When the devastating news of Zhou Yu's sudden death reached the capital, Sun Quan was utterly destroyed by grief, weeping uncontrollably. Young Lord personally donned the rough, white garments of mourning and led the agonizing reception of his beloved general's coffin. Many years later, when Sun Quan finally outlasted his rivals and ascended to the throne as an emperor, he stood before his fully assembled court, overflowing with emotion, and declared, "If it were not for Zhou Gongjin, I would absolutely never have become emperor." Because Zhou Yu died prematurely, Liu Bei was finally granted the breathing room he needed, capitalizing on the immense power vacuum left by Zhou Yu's passing. Liu Bei managed to borrow the critical province of Jingzhou, and subsequently conquered the western lands of Sichuan, the exact territories that Zhou Yu had masterfully plotted to seize. The entire trajectory of Chinese history was profoundly permanently altered by the tragic, untimely death of this singular military genius. Looking back on the brief, but blindingly radiant life of Zhou Gongjin, one is left with the distinct impression that he was simply too perfect. He was so flawlessly brilliant that perhaps even the heavens themselves grew fiercely jealous of his unparalleled talents, hastily rushing to pull him back from the mortal realm completely before his time. He was never and never should be viewed as a mere stepping stone, or a pathetic, supporting character designed solely to elevate the legend of Zhuge Liang. His brutal, chaotic epoch, Zhou Yu was the undeniable, absolute protagonist. The great wheel of history continues to completely crush forward. It will inevitably grind away the stubborn prejudices and the absurd fictionalizations violently forced upon him by the romance of the Three Kingdoms. Hundreds years after Zhou Yu's departure, when the literary titan Su Shi stood upon the shores of red cliffs in Huangzhou, gazing out at the relentless, eastward flowing waters of the Yangtze, the heroic spirit that manifested in his mind's eye was not the warlord Cao Cao. It was not the virtuous Liu Bei, nor was it the mystical Zhuge Liang. The man the poet saw was the peerless, elegant scholar, general, wearing his silk headpiece and holding his feather fan, orchestrating victory with absolute serene composure. Today, let us conclude by using the immortal lines from Su Shi's masterpiece, Nian Nu Jiao, a poem that has echoed through the centuries as the highest, most fitting tribute to this flawless hero, recalling Gongjin in those days when the beautiful Xiao Qiao had just married him. His heroic posture was radiant and majestic, with feather fan and silk cap. Amidst casual talk and laughter, the enemy's massive fleet was turned to flying ash and smoke. This, and only this, is the true face of history's magnificent Zhou Yu.